שלום לכולם וברוכים הבאים ליום ראשון אחר הצהריים עם הרב מייקל בילס, הרב של הנשיא ג'ו ביידן. ברוך הבא לקהילתנו, לקהילת הוד והדר. Welcome to our congregation, Rabbi Michael Beals, who's also known as Biden's rabbi. We're going to do this session in English, but we're going to enter words here and there. For those who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Tzvi Gretz, and the rabbi at congregation Kehilat Od Ve'adar. Kehilah is congregation in Hebrew. We're a congregation of 200 families in the Sharon area in Kfar Saba, we have a lot of activities throughout the year, bar mitzvahs, activities for young families, different lessons, shiurim. Obviously, the last year, a lot of it has moved to Zoom, but I'm happy to say that we had very interesting and nice activities as well. We started more than 40 years ago with just, a few of the founders. Some of them are with us even here today. And then I think more than 20 years ago, we moved into a beautiful building in Kfar Saba, which facilitates and has the ability to do a lot of nice activities in the Sharon area. The name Hod Ve'Hadar might be familiar for some of you from the Kabbalat Shabbat, first psalm that we sing on Kabbalat Shabbat with Hod Ve'Hadar, and it's also related to the area where we are with Hod is Hod HaSharon, which is a city next to Kfar Saba, where the congregation actually first met, and Hadar is a citrus tree, which many of them grow in our area of the Sharon. A lot of oranges and other Pri Etz Hadar, which is also known from the Bible, from Sukkot. But enough about us. We are so excited to welcome Rabbi Michael Beals and his daughter Ariella, maybe is also here on Zoom, and she's now in Israel, in no less than Tiberias in Tveria on the Nativ USY program. So also welcome Ariella. And Rabbi Beals, we know you as Rabbi of Biden, and there's also a huge, beautiful article that came out in Makor Rishon. You're able to see parts of it. Okay, and but if you could also tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up, and then we'll be able to start and roll from there.
Yofi. So Baruchim Habaim. Also, my mom wants a copy of that article, so you have to send me a photocopy, and I'll send it on to Orange County, California, where my mom lives. My dad passed away almost 2 years ago in June. I'm an only child, been a yachid, and because of COVID-19, it's become really kasha bishvilenu because I haven't been able to visit her. So I'm waiting to get vaccine number 2. Proudly, I'm happy to say, Israel already gave vaccine number 1 to Ariella as a 19-year-old already several weeks ago, before her Safta and before her Abba, because Israel is like the best, Hatov Yoter, at 30%. So kol hakavod lachem. Wow. I'm happy to say there's a lot of Chevri Beit Knesset Shalanu, congregation Beit Shalom, is with us as well. And that's why ani medaber Anglit velo Ivrit. My Kehila knows how to daven be'ivrit, but sichot maybe echad v'shtayim aval. We're really putting up a wall, and we're all about gesher. We're about building bridges. So I'm hoping this will be the first of many pe'ulot activities that Hod Ve'Hadar and Beit Shalom will do together. A little bit about Beit Shalom, a little bit about me. So Beit Shalom is getting ready to celebrate its 100th anniversary, our big centennial. So if you're free on Chamisha Shel November, which I know Kaftet November is really important, but this is the 5th of November of 2022. That will be our big gala, and maybe Biden will send a videotape. We're working on it. We don't necessarily want to have him because then we have to make room for all the bitachon, all the security, all the Secret Service, and then our own Chevrei Beit Knesset won't be able to come. So a video. I'm proud to say that Marla Cooper is on our Zoom call. She's the Nasiya, the president of Beit Shalom, and maybe more important to you, if I have a daughter who's studying with Nativ this year, she has a lone soldier who's defending everybody on this phone call from Kfar Saba, who is really doing magnificently in the IDF. And what more precious thing do we have than our children? So if you want to check the Zionist credentials of anybody chutz la'aretz outside of US, say, where are your children? And if we answer that any of them are in Be'eretz Yisrael, B'Medinat Yisrael, I think we've already proven our credentials and where we stand. Thank you very much. Because what do we have if not our children? Marla, Nishikot, Bishvilach. There's also other Heavy Beit Knesset with us who are just amazingly nice people who hopefully will meet during the conversation time. So our synagogue started out in, I guess, 1922. They had a Orthodox, rich Orthodox community down in what's our downtown area. And then as they went forward, the Reform movement came in next. That's normally American Jewish history, with the Temple of Truth, now known as Congregation because we've got more traditional, a bit Emet. And then we were the response. It's like thesis and antithesis. So Orthodox, Reform, and Congregation Bet Shalom. Or if you're a Goldilocks, just right. So that's how I look at Masorti and conservative, right in the middle. So I've been there 17 years. I'm in my 17th year of service. I am a native of San Francisco, California. My Ima's from the Bronx or Ha Bronx. And my Abba is from London, England, a blessed memory. Our family didn't have the money to come all the way to America when the pogroms were coming, the Russians were coming, and forced conscription was coming. But we had just enough money to get to the East End of London. So half my family is England and half my family is in America. So I really always like Spock and Star Trek, a Vulcan, a half-breed, half Vulcan, half Earthling. I'm half British and half Bronx. Britain and Bronx. Tea with milk, tea without milk. Zota Shelahi. I was born in San Francisco. I'm an only child. I did my education at UC Berkeley as an undergrad, political science, foreign relations, lived at International House, always loved international relations. And then I went to the American University School of International Service. I wanted to be a diplomat. I heard Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State. I thought maybe I could be too. And then, of course, Madeleine Albright. I thought it was time for a third. But now we've got a third one in there with the current Secretary of State. So I didn't quite make it for third. And I think it's too late for me. I'm a rabbi now. But hopefully Secretary of State will be the place where Jews will live.
Okay.
So we'll see near A. I did continuing studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where I fell in love with Israel and began to get more of a deeper understanding of Ha-Mitzav and being able to balance out liberal influences with more traditional conservative influences politically in order to come up with something a little bit more well-rounded about Israel. I learned as a Jew that I can't wait for Israel to do her own hasbara. I need to do it for her, because if I'm waiting for Israel to do her own hasbara, the Mashiach will come first. So I realized that's my responsibility. So I went from left to center left. I don't think I'm quite center right. I think I'm still on that left side of center, but I value what it means to be Merkaz, to be in the center. Word Merkaz politically, which makes a lot of sense in the state of Israel if you're of a certain ilk. So my first congregation, I studied to be a rabbi. So I started at the American University in Los Angeles. By the way, the Hebrew University year, I met our friend Jocelyn Levin, who's on this call from Victoria, British Columbia. Hebrew University was a real glue where I made a lot of my Jewish friends who are still my friends today. The Hebrew U program was outstanding. I did my first year at the 2 years at the American University in Los Angeles, and I went to Machon Shechter, where I kind of do-si-doed almost with Rabbi Tzvi Gret, very close, like within his avir. Is that atmosphere? And then back to Jewish Theological Seminary, or as we like to call it, the mothership, where I was ordained in 1997. I did my first 7 years in Los Angeles, where I got to make all of my mistakes. So when I came to Wilmington, Delaware, I was ready to rock and roll, hopefully a little bit more seasoned. But I'm human and I still make mistakes, and please God, I grow and learn from them. So that's my community. That's me. Oh, I'll tell you, there's 15,000 Jews in the state of Delaware. So it's not the biggest Jewish population in the country. About 30% affiliate, 70% chaval do not. And out of those that do, the largest synagogue is the Reformed Temple, Congregation Beth Emeth, about 600 plus congregants. A congregation Beit Shalom, us, we're about 420 family units, so roughly maybe 1,200 people. And then we've got a traditional synagogue in town. Have a Chabad. We have two, one on the University of Delaware campus, one in Wilmington. And we've got a reconstructing, it used to be Reconstructionist, but they changed their brand. So it's Reconstructing congregation in Newark, Delaware, which is where the University of Delaware is held. And that's where the Biden library, probably presidential library, will be in years to come. They already have his diplomatic papers, his 36 years serving in the Senate, his 8 years serving as vice president. And now that whole library project is on hold while Biden makes more papers. How's that for a start?
That's really great for a start. And actually, it helps us get to our core issue. How did President Biden and you meet? How did your relationship develop? And when did he start calling you his rabbi?
Well, there's a story.
You could share some personal anecdotes, which you kind of hinted to us when we had our preparation meeting. Psychotherapy, you mentioned something. There was something at the RA convention, right?
Oh, right. Okay. So I'll try to get to all of those as fast as I can.
Start from the beginning.
Breshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. No, that's not that beginning. I had already. So I should start before me. Back in 1972, a very young 29-year-old Joe Biden was going to run for Senate for the Democrat Party. He was going against a guy named Caleb Boggs, who was a well-entrenched Republican. It starts with an R, but it's different. Republican servant for the state of Delaware. And really, Biden didn't have a chance in Hades. Gehenna, going ahead and winning. There was strong support from Congregation Beth Shalom, which at that time was the largest synagogue in the state of Delaware. And a lot of our members supported him economically, politically. So that's back in 1972. So that's how far back that relationship goes. So you see, it predates me. I was only 9. So I wasn't even on the East Coast. But so I want to say it predates me, and I think it's really important. I think that's the seasoning in the cholent. And now the year is 2006. I've been rabbi for almost 2 years at Congregation Beth Shalom, and a lovely woman named Sylvia Greenhouse, Zichron Levracha, passes away. We have the Levaya, and then we do the Shiva. And for Shiva, we met at her home was in Claymont, which is the kind of the poor section of Wilmington, or not as affluent. It's where Joe Biden grew up as a kid, went to Archmere Academy, a nice Catholic school. And Mrs. Greenhouse lived in subsidized housing, a high rise. And her apartment, her dira, was katan, too small in order to fit a minyan in her kavod, in her honor. And so we went to a kind of like at your synagogue, the common room, right? So we went to the common room, but was smaller than your common room, I think, in order to have a shiva. So I'm leading this humble minyan. Most of the people have passed away now, not all, but most. And towards the end of the Amidah, this really tall, handsome guy with gray hair. Not me, I'm already leading the minyan. But this is another tall guy with gray hair, walks in, thicker hair actually. And he has his own black kippah, slightly creased from where he's folded and kept it in his pocket, put it on his rosh. It is Senator Joe Biden. And I knew who he was. He had run for president at least one time before. And he was our senior senator. I've certainly seen him in the state newspaper, but I'd never met him in person. And so I was a little befuddled, although having served in Southern California, I have met celebrities before, so I know how to carry myself. But I was a little befuddled. So I said to him, I wanted to say, Lama Tapo, why are you here? But that sounds so rude. There's ain't Derek Eretz if you say it like that. So I said, what brings you here, or something more polite. Remember, my dad's from London. So, and he said, well, this dear woman gave $18. He didn't say hi. So the question is, did he know? But he gave $18 to my campaign every 6 years, starting back in 1972. And I have come to show kavod, respect, and hoda'ah, and gratitude by being here. Now listen, my friends, there were no itonayim, there's no journalists, there's no paparazzi. There wasn't even an aide. He didn't even have somebody like a madrich to say, here we are at the synagogue. He knew where he was going. I got lost. It took me 3 times around this whole complex to find the right place, but he knew where he was. And I was just so struck by that moment. It wasn't recorded like this conversation. Nobody knew about it. And I just kind of tucked it away in the back of my head. And I brought it back out when he started running in the primaries, along with all these other young, good-looking people to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. And I brought it out because everybody was dismissing him. Oh, he's old, he's white, he's male. And I said, you don't know anything about this guy. Nothing at all. I said, and I told my story. And I said, I think the story teaches us several things. One is that he has multicultural sensitivity. He has a multicultural intelligence. He has emotional intelligence. And he has moral character. He's a menschlichkeit. And I wanted to bring that into the conversation. As a rabbi, you don't tell people for whom to vote. So a good way of losing your 504c3 standing. I just wanted to make the sikha more mesubach. I want to make the conversation more complicated about Biden for people who are going to write him off. So I'm going to take that story and put it in the parking lot. Maybe we'll bring it out in a little while. The second time I met him was at a bar mitzvah of one of our more affluent congregants, who was one of Biden's top 100 givers in the nation. And for their bar mitzvah party, the Mesibah Charei HaTekes, Balayla in the evening, they had a nice reception at the University of Delaware. And a lot of these B'nai Mitzvah, sometimes they have like the photo booth or different concessions, something to keep people active or engaged. So in this particular case, they had to take your photograph with Senator Biden Peula activity. And I didn't go near it because back from Drom, California, where I was a rabbi first in Southern California, we're taught leave celebrities alone, right? They have to be people too. So I didn't go near him. And he came bounding over to me like a caleb. If you remember the Flintstones, right? He was like Dino the dinosaur. And he said, buddy, chaver, achi, don't you want to take tuna? Don't you want to take a photo with me? And I said, well, sure, but I don't want to bother you. He said, it's no bother. And he threw his arm around me. And that's my first photograph with Joe Biden. It was such a yotza min haklal experience. It's not how I expected senators from seniority in the Senate to behave themselves. I expected something more aloof and more disengaged. He's the opposite. So then I started attending a lot of AIPAC meetings every year. AIPAC is the premier organization that supports the state of Israel in the United States. And Biden went to every single one and spoke, both as a senator and later as vice president. And I heard all sorts of stories that helped enrich my experience with him, like the story in 1948 when Israel first became a country and Biden was little boy Biden, I think in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in a very Catholic home. And his father, his Abba, said after Israel became a country, he said, we've got to be Zionists. After what happened to the Yehudim, the Shoah, we have got to be Zionists. We've got to support that state. So he learned his upbringing was to be supportive of the state of Israel as a moral experience, as an extension of his Catholicism, as an extension of what they owed. I think that's very important because our formative stories help shape who we become later. And sometimes I've heard people in Israel say, oh, Obama, Biden is more Obama. And I think that's stupid. I was a political scientist before I was a rabbinical student. And political psychology is really important, and your early experience helps shape your later experiences. Biden won that election, that first one, in 72, in Shivim V'Shalosh, before Melchemet Yom Kippur, before the Yom Kippur War. He went as an early member of the Foreign Relations Committee to Israel to meet Golda Meir. And the story he tells over and over again, which if you've heard it already, this is where you can schluff for 30 seconds and then come back in. He's taking photographs with Golda, and Golda says, Mr. Senator, I want to tell you the secret of Israel's survival. And Biden thinks she's going to talk about Dimona, and he really leans in, and she says to him, the secret for Israeli survival, we have no place else to go. And he tucked that in the back of his mind and never forgot. He tells that story at any opportunity for you to understand where he's coming from. So that's, it's not my story, but it's my story that I've heard him share that story so many times. Okay, more experiences with Biden. So at both at the Shiva meeting and at the Bar Mitzvah take a photo with Biden experience, he said to me, you know, I have a rabbi. My rabbi is Rabbi Gerwertz, Leon Gerwertz. Rabbi Gerwertz, Zikron Baruch, what was the rabbi, the Orthodox rabbi of the Orthodox synagogue in Wilmington, Delaware. But when he told me this story, this rabbi had been the Orthodox rabbi 25 years earlier, and he had since made Aliyah. And when I met Biden, I think Rabbi Gerwertz had been dead these last like 2-3 years. So after hearing that once or twice, I said respectfully, you know, Senator, this rabbi is lovely, but he's dead. You need a new rabbi. And I said that once or twice. I mean, I have a chush humor. I mean, you haven't caught that on by the last few minutes. That's why they keep me in my synagogue. I can calligraphy the bar mitzvah certificates. They don't have to hire calligraphists. And I'm relatively entertaining during morning minyan and Shabbat services. And listen, it could be a drag. And the idea is to keep Judaism lively and engaging and exciting and keep people together. That's all part of my mantra. So at any rate, that's what I said to Biden. I said, you need a new rabbi. So fast forward just a little bit. Now he's vice president of the United States. And I'm trying to think what happened first. Okay, correct order. So I had a rabbinical assembly meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was a keynote speaker. And at the end, he's going away, surrounded by Secret Service, and I'm in a group of line with my fellow rabbis, probably waiting to get on a bus to go to lunch or something like that. I think that's how it works, Rabbi Gratz. So waiting on a bus to go to lunch. And he catches my eye. And it's like, I don't want to say like the O.J. Simpson commercials because he's no longer held in repute. But there was a time when he had to catch the Avis car and he like jumps over barriers. And well, that's what Vice President Biden did. He saw me. He put the Secret Service in disarray, and he ran over all these barriers to get to me. Just okay, he give me a chibuk. As vice president, like who does that? First of all, my value went up in the eyes of my other fellow rabbis. So, whoa. But the piece de resistance was that Vice President Biden started having high holiday parties between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur at his official vice presidential residence on the top of Massachusetts Avenue by the Naval Observatory, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. Nice property. And he would have Chabad cater it and be the mishkiach. And he had the U.S. Navy band or something playing your favorite Freilach and klezmer music. It's kind of like, what did these guys know from Freilach and klezmer? And I was invited, and my plus one was my wife. And there were a lot of machers from the Obama-Biden administration, either in the administration or senators, Congress people, and leaders of the different movements. And Vice President Biden often goes off script, and he did this time. And he starts asking, where's my rabbi? And everybody started looking, where is his rabbi? I started looking, where's his rabbi? And then eyes locked on mine, and he said, oh, there's my rabbi. And so voila, that was, to answer your question, when I first got claimed. So I think it was in the mid or early days of the Biden-Obama administration, more to mid, I think. And he reinforced that. So I think that's my last anecdote for you for now. I don't know, Zvika, if you've ever done this before, but except for COVID, we've had this program called the Rabbinical Training Institute, where once a year we go to the Pearlstone Retreat Center outside of Baltimore, And we like-minded conservative rabbis, sponsored by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, do continuing education, some yoga, some meditation, long walks, nice kosher organic food, farm to table. And it's very good for our souls, our neshamot, and our bodies. And we had a late night session led by Rabbi Jack Moline, who's very much involved with government and politics, retired now. And he said, we're going to write letters. It was letter writing therapy. We're going to write people who dislike us. We're going to write a letter to that nasty congregant who we can't really speak to. We're going to write to a dead person. We're going to write all these letters at night, a different person each night, and share the letters. And then he gave us a freebie. You can write to whoever you want. So I decided to write to Joe Biden. And this was when he was deciding, should he run for president or not? So I wrote him a michtav. And in my michtav, my letter, I said, listen, I know a lot of people, we know it's wrong to be anti-feminist, right, against women, or anti-LGBTQ. It's wrong to be homophobic. It's wrong to be xenophobic, right? All these achet from Yom Kippur. We know these things are wrong. Why is it okay to be against people of a certain age? Why is that acceptable, mekubal? I said, this shouldn't be. It should be just as wrong. And for people who are writing you off because they think you're too old, it should be just as wrong and just as illegal to do that. I said, not only that, I said, but in Yehudut, in Judaism, we think age is a good thing, right? We think with age comes chokhmah, comes wisdom. If you look at Eshet Chaya, a woman of valor, who is she making? She's making beautiful clothing for her. So he will have the kavod of being able to be at the gate, at the entrance of the city, in order to decide law with these knim, with the elders of the gate. Being old has always been great in Judaism. I said, so if we ever needed wisdom, I said, we need wisdom right now. So I wouldn't discount that. I said, not only that, but Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, was Ben Shmoni. He was 80 years old when he took the children of Israel out of slavery, Mitzrayim in Egypt. I said, compared to him, you're a whippersnapper. So I said, for goodness sakes, please do not write yourself off because of your age. Because I think it's one of your strongest attributes and should not be discounted. So I got a friend of his to deliver the letter to him. I don't have direct relations with communication with President Biden. It's always there's somebody in between, kind of like in Catholicism, the priest, right? So it's not direct. But this letter got to him, and he wrote me a letter back, which was extraordinary in his own handwriting. And first of all, he wrote, "You are my rabbi." So now it's in writing. So that's, I have it. It's like, I have the Magna Carta. I got the, "You are my rabbi." And then he told me he's counted among his friends Golda, meaning Golda Meir, and Eli, meaning Eli Wiesel. He said all these people have been a source of strength for him throughout the years. And he said he's always appreciated the support of the Jewish community and considers them his friends. And he considers me his friend as well and supports all that support. And then he just said, keep the faith, Joe. So that's the letter. So I saw a little message that came over the chat box, so I'll answer it really quickly. So I don't have a position as Joe's rabbi. It's what he called me my rabbi, and how it came to pass was the story I told you a little while ago. So I'm going to take it out of the parking lot now about Mrs. Greenhouse and the Shiva visit, etc. When people were trying to introduce Joe Biden to the Jewish community, or reintroduce, they used that story. They used that story in, it turned out, fundraising letters, although I never approved it for fundraising letters. It was used, thank you. Ariella is on the, because she just told me she loves me, so Baruch Hashem. So for anybody that doesn't like what I'm saying, as long as my daughter loves me, the rest of you are chopped liver. My wife, my daughter and my wife, those are the people I answer to. Hashem and the president of my shul. The rest of you, God bless. So anyway, they started showing this over and over again, and actually got shown at the Democratic National Convention, which went virtual. I dare say, if we weren't living in COVID times, I don't know if my being Joe's rabbi, in quotes, would have gotten us anywhere. I think because so many things have been done remotely, including our Peggy Shah Hayom, I think that's our halayla for Erev Bishvachem. I think that's the reason why. So no, I have no tafkid. As I said before, I can't give him advice on anything. I wouldn't try. But now and then I've been his entree to the Jewish community when he's needed it. And I just tell these very brief stories, and hopefully you could connect the dots based on the past where he might go in the future. I'm not a Navi, I'm only a rabbi. I can't predict where he will go. And as you ask me questions, I will come back to that over and over again. Don't ask me to predict, it wasn't part of my ordination. Back to you, Rabbi.
Okay, good. That's wow. It's really amazing. And often American presidents are judged, in our eyes, in the Israeli community eyes, in the Jewish community eyes, are on two issues. Are they good for the Jews, and are they good for Israel? It's like even if it doesn't always make sense, that they're judged sometimes in our eyes in that way. So what are your feelings about the question, is President Biden going to be good for the Jews, and in what way? Also.
Right, sure. So I feel more important than anything else that Biden feels babayit with Yahdu. He feels at home with Judaism. And the fact that all of his grandchildren are Jewish is already a start, that all of his children chose to marry Jews. The latest one, Hunter, married a young lady with the last name Cohen from South Africa. Just really starts when Biden went ahead and did his acceptance hurrah in the riverfront area of Wilmington. He was holding this little baby who's a young boy who's halakhically Jewish. So that's one. He has skin in the game. Not necessarily Orthodox Jews, which in some parts of Israel, that's the only type of Jew that's a Jew. He is Jews which we in America would call normal Jews, the type of Jews that you'd run into the street, the Jews that make up the majority of Jews in the United States of America. And the fact that he goes back to 1972 and counts his success based on Jewish support is really good for the Jews. I think the fact that he feels so comfortable at B'nai Mitzvah. I mean, a lot of my experiences come at my own Beit Knesset, that he pops in the synagogue whenever he wants to. Not as much since he's been vice president. I doubt as president he'll be busy, but he always have a welcome in our Beit Knesset, and not just ours. With a lovely woman named Sonia Sloan, who just passed away a little while ago, and he was a keynote speaker at her Levaya at the Reform Temple. He just feels really comfortable with us. The fact that he refers to Golda Meir as Golda, he goes back a long ways in his Judaism, all the way back to his table, as I mentioned, in Scranton with his father and family. So he just feels comfortable with us. In fact, his first love in high school was a Jewish girl. But at that time, those things were not done. It was, to quote my best Hebrew, it was pashnisht. I won't translate, but you figure it out. So he's always felt comfortable with us, and he understands Jewish humor and nuances. The fact that he's put so many Jewish folk in his cabinet at the highest levels, Blinken as Secretary of State, and Yellen as Secretary of the Treasury, all sorts of people in positions which can make a difference, is really partially because he feels comfortable with how we are. I think it's really great. So I do think he will be good for the Jews, not because he's pandering to us, not because he has a small base that is particularly of one ilk of Judaism, but he's a kind of like conservative or Masorti Judaism. He's a big tent. He can't be a Jew, right? So a Juliophile. We'll get to Catholicism in a moment when you ask me the question.
Just a follow-up question here, like, how much do you think he knows the difference between the different streams in Judaism and the not so great relationship between the different streams? Like, you think he's aware of that?
I don't know. We've never had the conversation. I do know he certainly feels comfortable with centrist Judaism, and he's appreciated when he goes into conservative reform Beit Knesset. Wait. Zvika, that rabbi of his was Orthodox, and the synagogue that he ran was Orthodox. It's no longer Orthodox, now it's traditional. Why? It's small politics in OU world. Back when the synagogue was younger, this Orthodox synagogue had 3 sections. men on one side in an aisle, women on the far side in an aisle, and mixed seating in the middle. And that was fine until the OU went to the right. And the OU forced the issue for this poor synagogue. And a lot of husbands and wives have been davening together for 30, 40 years. They didn't want to break up over this. So they wouldn't put a mechitza in. And so the OU kicked them out. And so now they're traditional. But that was that was Senator Biden's first rabbi, was an Orthodox rabbi. So maybe that helps you answer the question.
Okay, that's interesting. So you mentioned President Biden, is Catholic, and what do you know of what he thinks about Israel, and not so much, in political matters or security issues like mentioned before, but just from his own personal and religious beliefs, which you know.
So I do know. So I could tell you. So I think that there's different ways of being Jewish and there's different ways of being Catholic. And I'm not sure if a lot of our Jewish friends know that Catholicism is nuanced. So the fact that he believes that women should have a right to choose over their own body, right, when it comes to issues of abortion, throws him right out of where the Pope is, right? So that's a big issue. The Republican Party used it to clobber him with and alienate. So to say that he buys in hook and sinker every single policy of Catholicism is probably not the case. But when it comes to caring for the underdog, or caring for people in need, and certainly caring about the environment, he's very much in line with the current Pope. A moment about the current Pope. The current Pope, Pope Francis, used to be the Cardinal of Argentina. His best friend in the Jewish community was the head of the Masorti movement, right? From this seminario, not Orthodox.
Right.
Seminario. So the Pope has that, and in fact, they wrote a book together called Between Heaven and Earth, when they went ahead and balanced Catholic views on issues versus Jewish views on issues. And the Jewish views on issues was from this Masorti rabbi. That fellow became the Pope. So the Pope understands our flavor of Judaism better. That's not to say he doesn't have good relations with the chief rabbi in Rome, right, which is an Orthodox rabbi. But these nuances are important on both sides. So when it comes to Catholicism, I would say that President Biden has a deep and abiding faith, that he doesn't wear it like a coat when it suits him. He wears it all the time. But he really respects religion in general. So maybe I'll tell you one more anecdote. In, I guess it was, I wish I had the year now, 2016, I think. After he declared me officially as his rabbi, or a little before that, we got to take photos with Joe and Dr. Jill Biden. So my wife and I are queuing up, and there was an Orthodox Rav there. And he said to me, Michael, why don't you give the vice president a blessing? Now, I don't know. I don't know about you, Tzvika. How many times have you gone around and just giving for a bar mitzvah, sure, a wedding? I'm normally like I don't know about you, Tzvika, but I'm like an event-oriented blesser. Like when it's part of the tekes, the ceremony, I'll do it. Just like on the fly, like, like Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory, and here's $1, slicha dollar, and here's a mitzvah. That's not the type of rabbi I normally am. But it didn't sound like a bad idea, and everybody could always use a blessing. So I went ahead at the end of our photo shoot. He was working the line really fast. A lot of people behind me still. And I said to Vice President Biden, I said, would you like a blessing? I mean, I didn't have a lot of bitachon betzmi. I didn't have a lot of security in the way I asked the question. And he said, I sure would. Kind of like a kid in a candy store. So, okay. So I don't know about you, Tzvika, but what blessing do you give? The threefold, the big three, right? The one that we give to our children on Shabbat. That's the one I know that I didn't have to look up in a book really fast. I know that blessing. So I put my, and then I was a little chutzpahdik. I put my hands up on his forehead, and he bowed his forehead with his little black crease yarmulke on still. And I gave him the threefold benediction. And the respect that he showed me would have been the same respect that he would have shown a priest, have the priest given him that blessing. In fact, the next thing happens after that is his son, Beau Biden, dies. When he dies, he asks through his intermediaries, will I represent the Jewish community at the funeral, at the Levaya? I didn't say anything. Would I be on the bima along with some other guys from Rome and go ahead and just be present. So maybe that answers a lot of questions about his Catholicism, about what does it mean to be Joe's rabbi. I mean, hopefully you can start connecting dots. What does it mean and what does it not mean? When it comes to policy, it doesn't mean anything. Does it mean speaking for the president? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that I'm a bridge to the Jewish community when he needs it? Yes.
Okay, so we had a great time till now, Rabbi Beals, and now we're gonna up the temperature a little bit,
Right.
because we're gonna start talking a little bit more about Israel and relationship. You should know the biggest question in the news now in Israel, it's on constant in the news, is when is Biden going to call Bibi? Okay, the media is obsessed with that, because he called, the president of France, and he called, Merkel in Germany, and everyone, all the important ones. And what more important state in the world is there than the state of Israel?
There is no
Uh,
more important state than the state of Israel, Rabbi, right?
you got the right answer. Uh, and you should obviously know that since we are going into our fourth elections in just a few weeks, it's a serious electoral question as well. How come Biden's not calling Bibi? What does it mean? Like the commentaries are growing wild. So that's my introduction to what are your feelings about the question, is President Biden going to be good for Israel? And if so, in what ways?
Sure. Yeah, I do have a lot to say. Um, the first thing I'll say is that you already know that Biden loves Jews. He already knows that Israel is the state of the Jewish people. That goes back to 1948. So that's part of this cheder experience, if you will. Number one, he's had great relationships with prime ministers in the past. Not always. Menachem Begin, I understand there was a problem, but Golda Meir, certainly. So Bibi stories. So there's a story that when Biden was already vice president and he was sent by Obama to Israel, and at that point there in the minister for the interior was in the hands of Schatz, and Schatz decided to greet Biden by an announcement that they were going to increase the settlements, expand the settlements. And this was his Welcome to Israel prize. And so the head of Biden's staff said to Biden, we should register our disdain by boycotting the state dinner that Prime Minister Netanyahu has created for your visit. And Biden said, absolutely not. That would show disrespect for the prime minister. And although I disagree with the announcement of expanding the settlements in contradiction to U.S. policy at that time, I'll talk about it with Bibi over dinner, but we're going to have dinner. And so that's what happened. I'm sure it was a spirited conversation. He was quoted, Biden has quoted himself as saying, I love Bibi. I don't always agree with him, but I love him. So that's already that's the beginning of that conversation, Svika. Now it gets more complicated because you're going into elections again. I will tell you that the demise of the Obama-Netanyahu relationship started when we were having an election, and Netanyahu, who knows American politics very well and aligns more naturally with the Republican Party, came out forward and supported Mitt Romney. Now, it turns out now Mitt Romney is the most liberal of Republican senators, but not back then. Back then, he was the representative of the Republican Party to be president. And Netanyahu came out publicly and supported. And a lot of people said the reason why other prime ministers have never done that before, that's called the third rail that you don't touch, because you never know who's going to win. What if your horse loses? And that's what happened in this case. Obama won. And so after that, the relationship was really, really sour. What do we learn from that? We learned that it's not good to stick our nose in other people's elections, right? Israel's a sovereign country, and so is the United States. And so I would think, so this is me speculating, and I'm sorry I'm speculating because I promised I wouldn't, but I'll do one speculation. If elections hadn't been called already, I think that phone call, that conversation would have already happened. But the problem is whatever the president of the United States does now is overinterpreted in Israeli politics, either being as pro or against. Now, to say they haven't spoken isn't true, because I can read the newspaper as easily as you can, and Netanyahu already called Biden to wish him mazal tov on winning the election. So to say they haven't spoken since winning the election is not true. Now, you just mentioned other phone calls that Biden has had, but can you see that there's a pattern to those phone calls? These are all with former allies that in the last administration that president burned bridges with, be it Germany or Canada or France, since you mentioned those three countries. And so there's a lot of tikkun that needs to happen. Baruch Hashem, thank God, Trump hasn't done anything to endanger the relationship between the United States and Israel. So there's nothing to repair. It's healthy. Plus, the next big thing on the issue is complicated. It's what we affectionately call Hametzav with the Palestinians. It's a messy issue. And for the president to turn his attention to that when we're still fighting corona virus, I thought you were in Israel as well, actually. I thought that's why you created a unity government in the first place, because COVID-19 was such a threat to the playing politics at this time wasn't such a smart idea. So the fact that your unity government has dissolved and you're calling elections boggles my mind, especially when pikuach nefesh is the number one Jewish value. I don't understand, but somebody can explain it to me, I'm sure. But in this country, COVID-19 is really serious. And that's the number one issue why this president was elected, was he promised he would deal with it. And boy, we need to, because we're hands over fist losing people still. And it's serious, it's existential in terms of our population. And then we have got social justice issues that we've got to fix. What happened last summer and even during the Obama Biden administration has been a disaster. Our racial justice issues are not just about feeling good, or not just about last week's Torah portion about mishpatim, about the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and everybody who's marginalized. It's bigger than just ethics. There are lives on the line. We got global warming. I'm from California. I mean, my Southern California area has been on fire so many times in the last year. And I don't think we here in this group will say that global warming is a fiction. I think we understand it quite well, especially what's happening in Israel and here. We've got so many issues we need to tackle. To try to tackle the Palestinian-Israeli situation, the best thing we could do is get out of the way and try to help Israel wherever Israel wants to be a Rodef Shalom. That's our job, is to help Israel make peace, not make peace for Israel. So don't be so worried that Biden hasn't made the call yet. I think that meddling in Israeli politics at this tricky time would be a disaster for Israel and the United States and their future relationship. That's as far as I'll go in terms of speculation.
Okay, but since you did mention Oto Aish, President Trump, and the past administration. So I have a few questions about that. 75% of Jews, I think, voted for President Biden. How and obviously there's a big rift between the two camps, and is there an attempt to sort of like bridge between those guys? Is it even possible? Because I know a lot of people also from the Democratic, like, I can't talk to someone who voted for Trump, melee in the Jewish community, but let alone outside. Are there things that people are working on trying to mending those bridges? And a follow-up question on that is really, a lot of Israelis favor Trump for all the good things he did for Israel. How do you put that in the equation?
Well, let's separate those two things out. They're two very different questions. So the last trip that I presided over to Israel was right before the missiles started flying from the Gaza Strip. I know that that's happened more than one occasion, but this was the last major melee of missiles. And to your point, the rabbis that from Delaware that led that trip to Israel was Orthodox, conservative, and Reform. So here in Delaware, we seem to have figured out how to work together. In the Jerusalem Post, there was an article two, 3 Shabbatot ago called "The Delaware Way," which I I wrote, to try to explain what is the soil that Biden comes from. And I can display it mostly within the Jewish community. We pull together. I mean, when it comes to Simchas Torah, Chabad is expecting me to come over and visit and do a l'chaim with them, and they give me a mitzvah pledge. The Reconstructionist rabbi and I, we've done services together on several occasions. When we do a Beit Din for a conversion, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist rabbis teach the class together like the Ne'eman Commission was supposed to do. The Orthodox rabbi can't preside over the conversion itself, but we don't do. I used to do strict conservative movement conversions using the rabbis from Philadelphia. I've stopped. We do our own Delaware Jewish Beit Din with Reform, Reconstruction, and Conservative. And then whoever the rabbis, the Ava Beit Din, heading the movement, is under his paperwork. That's the Delaware way. That's what Joe Biden presided over for 36 years in the Senate, 8 years then as vice president, and now as president. That's the model about how you work together. You respect people, you respect their differences, you celebrate their differences, and then you work together on the common cause. That's the way we've always done it in Delaware, which is why I think we're really lucky to have a president from the state of Delaware, and for you, our Israeli friends, to understand that something unique, not entirely in the United States. You don't see that in New York City. You don't see that in the main line of Philadelphia. You see it in Delaware, and that's where Biden comes from. And those are the people he talks to. So that's a way of explaining who we are and what you might expect from Biden moving forward. I would think that if you look at his administration, there was a, this is President Day's week. I know it's Valentine's Day, red tie, I made breakfast for my wife in bed, but it's also President Day's weekend as well. And Abraham Lincoln was most known for a book recently came out called The Team of Rivals, where he put a lot of people in his cabinet who don't all see eye to eye. I know that because in the right-wing Jewish press, they've talked about people in his cabinet who won't necessarily be so pro-Israel, etc. They won't talk a lot about the people who are pro-Israel because that's not their bent. But Biden likes to surround himself with people with all sorts of different points of view so we can make the best decision possible, which is exactly the way a confident, mature president should lead the country, not with yes men, but with people, yes women, but people who will give all sorts of different opportunities and advice so the president can then choose the right policy or path forward. In terms of being good for Israel, so now I'll tell you a personal incident quickly. When I did that trip to Israel that I mentioned earlier with the Reform Orthodox and Conservative rabbi, my wife, my Ariella, who's listening on this call, and my Shira, we stayed on later. We were going to extend it into our family vacation. Our last day in Israel, we went to the open air animal park in Ramat Aviv. Maybe some of you know it, outside of Tel Aviv. And in the middle of our visit there was an air raid siren, and everybody was going to the only place for shelter was the Shirutim, which weren't so sturdy, but that's where we went. So we didn't fit in; they were all crowded, so we're like in the middle. So Ariel and I looked up, and we saw a missile coming right at us from the Gaza Strip, and then right behind us we heard this big boom. What was the big boom? Iron Dome. An Iron Dome came, went up in the air, and they took that missile out, saving our lives. So first of all, there is a Jewish law saying that if you are a beneficiary to the law that's being discussed, you have to go ahead and recuse yourself. You can't be a part of it. So in a way, when it comes to politics and Biden, I owe my life and I owe my family's life to Biden and Obama because they're the ones who first initiated the Iron Dome funding above the normal 3 point whatever $1 billion a year that Israel gets from the United States in military defense funding. Biden pushed it through because he thought Israel needed it. And because of that investment several years earlier, Israeli technology and innovation created this amazing Iron Dome defense, which actually saved my life and the life of my kids. So when you talk about if Biden is good for Israel, I would say past is prologue. In the Senate, he presided over the Foreign Relations Committee for many years, which when I first became rabbi at Beth Shalom was $3.3 billion a year. By the time Biden left office as vice president, it was $3.8 billion, And get this, because I'm not sure if all of you know this, but Biden and Obama went in and created an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with the state of Israel, for a commitment of 10 years at the level of $3.8 billion a year. And that's money you could take to the bank. That's money that Israel doesn't have to spend in defense, so they could spend it to feed their people and go ahead and do all the other policies and come up with money for COVID-19 vaccines and technology, etc. It's $3.8 billion over 10 years, which was all the years of the Trump White House and into this new administration, which Biden is still obligated to based on an obligation that he and Obama created when they were president. That's talkless. All the things that Trump did were great, and I don't denigrate any of them. We could talk about those things if you'd like to, but I just ask for balance. I just ask for balance, especially when you're considering what this president might do in the future. Denigrating what he did in the past, I think, is ingratitude on the part of Israelis, and it shouldn't be done. And I don't think it's deliberate ingratitude. I just think it's based on ignorance, and the louder voices kind of dominate the conversation. I'm not a loud voice. I just want to create some sort of balance.
Well, we're towards the end of the conversation, but it is interesting to understand how do American Democratic Jews who voted for Biden view Israelis who favor Trump, and
Yes.
that.
Betach. Yeah. Okay, very quickly. So people define their Judaism in many different ways, at least in the United States. That's all I'm qualified to talk about. Some Jews define their Judaism based on the Holocaust, what happened in the Shoah, and they completely define themselves on that. And that's how they give their tzedakah, only on Holocaust things. Other people who support a more living, breathing Judaism might go ahead and fund Jewish day schools, and B'tei Knesset, and places where Judaism isn't dead, but Judaism is alive and well and living. Other people define their Judaism solely on what they think is good for the state of Israel, and only that. And a lot of times, your own Jewish identity will define where do you fall out on these issues. So, if you're a Jew, let's say a Masorti or conservative Jew, state of Israel is important, but it's not the only mitzvah that we're obligated to. And in this country, we're dedicated to issues of education, of social justice, of the environment. All these are issues. And so when we're considering a president who to support, we're going to look at all those issues and see how it's going to impact the United States. Israel is up there. And the more you identify as a Jew, I dare say, the higher Israel ranks in those areas. But the more you're involved in the entire world and not living in a ghetto, the more Israel is going to be balanced along with other issues. American Jews, many American Jews are worried about being accused of dual loyalties. Where are your loyalties really? If I put all my interest only in the state of Israel, and what I think is going to be good for the state of Israel, and I don't balance all these issues as American citizens, then perhaps I'm not creating that balance. And so, Svika, it's a hard question you've asked, because I think the rift goes into where's your value system, and what do you think is important as a Jew, and what do you know about your Judaism in order to balance those values. So to say my values are only on the Abraham Accord and only on Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights and only on the embassy moving to Jerusalem and not talking about anything else, I don't know, as a conservative Jew, I think is being irresponsible, especially if you live in the United States. There are other issues that we need to balance as well. And I think that's the difference. And that's where the conversation really hinges. Whilst if you're an Israeli, maybe all you care about is the embassy moving to Jerusalem and sovereignty over the Golan Heights and the Abraham Accords. Those three issues, kind of like the Trinity, right? They're very clear, powerfully symbolic issues, which we could digest and dissect if we had the time. But those are the three big issues. But to talk about all the other stuff that's gone on in this United States over the last 4 years and just not talk about it, and as Israeli, perhaps you have the liberty to do that. But as an American citizen, I feel like I have to consider all those other issues as well as a good Jew.
Okay. Wow. So we've gone through a whole fascinating hour where, we've laid out, the personal issues and also the more bigger issues. And it's fascinating to hear the perspective of a colleague, a American Jew, conservative rabbi. It's fascinating for all of us, and also I think it's a voice we haven't heard also for many years now, because of the rift that is growing between Israel and American Jewry. So this has been really important and refreshing, and in that sense, maybe people like you with your message are going to be able to mend those bridges, which is so necessary. I also want to, we want to give you a final closing word, but I also want to invite the chairman of our congregation, Max Moss, who helped, think and plan along, the three of us about the day today, to also maybe say and help us close this, and give, the message of greeting, and then Rabbi Beals will answer or comment, and then we'll conclude in that way.
So first of all, Shalom, Rabbi Beals. Toda Rabba. I think that what I take away from this is that a lot of our work internally within ourselves and within our communities is how we build bridges. And what you spoke about what is it the meaning of being a Jew, I think there are different sides to it living in the United States than there are in Israel. But I think that exploring that together, it would be a very worthwhile activity, because we live in Israel. We don't have to reaffirm that we're Jewish, but we constantly confront who we are, how we conduct ourselves, how we view the world, how we view things around us. And I think that, reaching out to another community, and it sounds like Delaware is a great place to do that, to learn a bit about the Delaware way. Maybe we can import the Delaware way to Israel, okay? Because I think that we need to learn to build bridges between ourselves and Yahadut in America, okay? We need to consider Yahadut in America when we conduct ourselves here in Israel as well. And I think that looking to building bridges, and we should look to see how we can explore some opportunities to do that. And just on a very, very side note, I would like to have the email of the lone soldier. I came to Israel as a lone soldier.
Wow.
And very much identify with lone soldiers, and would be happy to extend, maybe he has all the warmth and comfort that he needs, but we're happy to extend that to him, okay, if he's open to it, and if he wishes to. If not, fine, it's good, okay. But I would like to follow up on that particular small little point, okay, as some small starting point. Not to talk about the fact that your daughter is a welcome guest in our community as well, okay. And if there's anything that we can do at that level, okay, bakasha. I think what we learn. I see Ariella. Okay. Shalom, Ariella. Hi. Okay. I think if we learn anything from what you've said to us today, it's how can we be mentioned, right? And Biden's told us how to be a mensch, and let's look at it in ourselves. As how can we be mentioned? So, okay, Yishar Kochacha. And I kind of feel this is a beginning.
Thank
we
you
should
so
do
much.
more together for sure. I think this is a very good idea. I think we have maybe parallel organizations in our sisterhood and men's club, our Hebrew school, when it's 11 o'clock our time, it's 6 o'clock your time. Maybe there could be an afternoon pe'ula about improving English, and maybe teaching our kids at least basic Hebrew, or maybe Hebrew slang, the clean stuff. There's so many opportunities to create bridges. One day we will be able to travel again on the other side of COVID-19. And I feel like if we build our bridges properly, then I think we should be going to Hod V'Hadar as one of our stopping off places for Aruchat Achar Tzorayim or maybe Mincha or something like that as part of what we do to build those bridges. Right now, Beth Shalom does have a sister community in Arad. And that's something that the Jewish Federation has developed. And there's, of course, a small and very established conservative synagogue or Masorti in Arad as well. I think Shira Hadasha, I think it's called, maybe.
Yeah, they've been there for many, many years. I should also say that we have a few other Masorti rabbis with us here on the call from different cities. And we also have representatives from many Masorti communities in down south, in Omer, I recognize, from Rehovot, from Haifa, Jerusalem, a few communities. So this is a gathering of not just from Kfar Saba. This is also an opportunity to welcome everyone here.
Baruchim habayim chaverim, my colleagues and my friends, my comrades.
Tov.
Okay.
Toda Rabba.
So I would tell you that in terms of looking at a psuk to gather us together, it's of course it's 133 verse 1. Hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad. And of course I always translate achim as brothers and sisters together. And I think that's probably Biden's favorite verse too, if I could pick one out for him. And I think the more we can listen to each other with respect, the more important that is. And if you were going to ask me, where does the phenomena of Trumpism come from? I think it comes from a place of people who feel like they haven't been heard for so long. And when people are not heard, they'll sometimes do what they need to do to be heard. So if you're looking at where, by the way, I'm glad you said about Gesher, because I know my president, my Nasi is still listening, Marla, who you should definitely spotlight and give a wave to. But Marla Cooper would tell you that the theme of our 100th year is Gesher. And we want to talk about a Gesher to Avar, a bridge to our past, obviously, a bridge to everybody in our current situation, and a bridge to our future as well. And all of our programming for the next year and a half is all going to be on how to explore the word Gesher and all of its many opportunities. No walls, just bridges. And so to have a Gesher to the beautiful Kehillah in Kfar Saba is really so important. As political things come up, especially if they're difficult, Hafaz Khalila, I hope that we'll be able to maybe tune in and to check in with each other. And if I understand something, I'll explain it to you. But I want to make sure that you don't understand that I am a spokesman for Biden. I'm not. I'm an advisor for Biden. I'm not. But at the right time, I can be an entree to the Jewish community and a gesher between him and us. And obviously, if there was an issue that was burning in your community, I'd do everything I could to talk about it here in the United States to your benefit. What happens to Israel impacts upon me in a very personal way, and I'm not alone in that. A lot of my heart is here in the United States in Wilmington, but there's always a part of my heart, and with Ariella there, my soul, in Israel as well. And it won't be too long until Shira, Ariella's younger sib, will be visiting Israel as well on a year program as well. I made some of my best friends on my year programs. Israel is the place where we get water from our well, so we can do the work that we need to do in Chutz La'aretz. We need both a strong Jewish community in Israel, and for the sake of Judaism, we need a strong Jewish community out here. I'll give you one last thing to think about, and that is Zionism. Zionism has two faces to it. One is obviously the nationalistic enterprise that had there been a Jewish state when Hitler came into power, there would have been a home for the Jewish people. There wouldn't have been a white paper to keep the Jews out. It would have been a very, very different story. And that story is with us today. It's the national, it's the life preserver of the Jewish people, is the state of Israel. I get that. But to only define Zionism that way, I think is simplistic and sad and very narrow. And I turned to the Shalom Hartman Institute, one of my favorite places in the state of Israel, for the other understanding of Zionism. Zionism is the great Jewish experiment. It's not over. It's continuing. How do Jews with sovereignty take the best of Jewish values as found in the Tanakh and the Talmud and other writings in Jewish philosophy and actually live it on a day-to-day basis and make policies. And when Jews are in positions of power and authority, how do we exercise that power and authority for people who are marginalized? Those are all the challenges of Zionism. And to ignore that, I think, is to be ignorant. It's missing the exciting part of Zionism, the dynamic. Zionism isn't dead. Zionism is alive and well and growing. But when we only define Zionism in terms of where we move the embassy and the sovereignty over the Golan Heights and the Abraham Accords, I think it's a very simplistic Zionism that goes to existential issues, but doesn't get to the heart. And I think we need to be able to do both in terms of our advocacy for Israel here in the United States. Definitely the foreign aid packages and all the stuff that we do to support Israel here, but also what about the ethical issues and the value issues and the things that make Yidden, make Mensches. Those conversations need to be a part of it. And of course, I'm biased. I think the Masorti movement is the place to begin to have those conversations based on the way we live Judaism on a day-to-day basis. So that's my final word.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Michael Beals. Ta'aleh michayil lechail, and next time you meet President Biden, send him warm regards from us here in the Masorti movement as well. People are free to unmute themselves if they want to. I'm going to stop the recording.